Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers, aka MBB, aka Bangers, aka I'm back. If you want to know what's been going on, stay tuned to the end of the video, but I know you're here for Pocket content, so let's talk about the state of Pokemon Pocket right now in terms of what the meta is looking like, what ranked is doing to the meta, and overall, like just some observations as to how the top decks are impacting the rest of the game. So let's get into it. Right now, the game really revolves around big, basic EX Pokemon. And in particular, there are three that really come to mind when you talk about dominating the game and kind of warping the meta around them. Originally, as we saw the new cards come out, if you were watching on one of my live streams when we dissected the new set, Wizzy, one of the awesome contributors to this channel, a good person that I've gotten to know since playing Pokemon Pocket, had the idea to maybe play Mewtwo and Giratina together. So we sat there and we built out a Mewtwo Giratina deck, and that was the first time that really the game had seen anything like that kind of deck with four big basic EX Pokemon that all have really good synergy. Eventually it did get put to three Pokemon, and then we saw the Darkrai Giratina kind of take form as well without the Druddigon. But right now it seems like if you're going to build a deck, there's a good chance that you're playing one of these three big basic EX Pokemon. So you've got Giratina, and then you've got Darkrai, right, which is able to basically deal passive damage to the opponent's active Pokemon and then potentially hit them for 80 damage with their own attack. And then you've also got a genetic apex favorite, Mewtwo EX. Now, each of these EXs are not played in the same deck, right? Let's get that out of the way. But there's obviously the combination of these EX Pokemon, whether it's Giratina Mewtwo or Giratina Darkrai. Some people choose to play Arceus alongside this. Personally, I think that that's just suboptimal, but when you take a look at tournament results, including a back-to-back winner at Ursi Days, you're starting to notice that there's a lot of trends around these big basic EX Pokemon, and it's leading to a lot of frustration among the community. Now, right now, I would say the biggest way to climb on ranked, right? The most popular way to climb on ranked, the easiest way to do it is typically either play some variant of those three big basic EX Pokemon, or you can play something that counters them, right? Maybe it's a one prize fighting deck with Rampardos. Maybe you're playing something like Gallade, which is a little bit higher HP as a trade-off for it being an EX and then obviously not being a fossil. Or maybe you decide to play something like Meowscarada and then you could partner it with something like Magnezone. All of these are very popular choices, but basically the meta can sort of be simplified into one of two things, right? You're either playing big basic EX Pokemon, or you're playing a counter to those big basic EX Pokemon, right? And in particular, you're playing either Meowscarada that directly counters EX Pokemon, or you're playing something like Gallade that basically says, hey, I'm going to use those big energies that you're attaching to your Pokemon as a weapon against you. Rampardos and Magnezone kind of fill different roles, right? But they're both doing roughly the same goal of being a potential closer for one prize, right? And you've seen different variations of all of those decks, right? From Gallade to Rampardos to Magnezone to Meowscarada. You've seen Beedrill and Meowscarada. You're seeing a bunch of different things, right? And generally speaking, these are probably considered to be the top decks. Now, every now and then, you will see somebody have success with something like a Skarmory, right? And what Skarmory and also what things like Carnivine are trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, we're also basic Pokemon, but we're going to start putting pressure a lot faster than those big basic EX Pokemon, right? We may be a little bit glassier, but with one energy and maybe one other card, whether it's Arceus or a Pokemon tool, we're roughly accomplishing that early game pressure and putting you on your back foot as we potentially build up our boss Pokemon, which could be an Arceus, it could be a Dialga. There's all sorts of things that you can kind of partner with Carnivine and Skarmory. But basically, that's kind of the meta in a nutshell. It's either play big basic EX Pokemon or play the things that counter them, whether it's fast aggression or whether it's a one prize stage 2 deck, right? And obviously the potential Gallade. But you know, when you take a look at this, it's basically shutting out a lot of the other cards that we have known to, you know, be very good in past metas. Now, if you take a look at some of these other cards, like Weavile, right? Weavile can potentially fill a role of being that fast aggression, but it does depend on being evolved, right? And then also you need that synergy with something like a Darkrai EX in a lot of cases to go ahead and start really dealing big numbers. If you're unable to do that, well, then it can be a lot more worse of a performing deck, and you might as well be playing something else. The other thing to look at with Weavile is Weavile has a tough time with some of the one prize decks if they're able to find their pieces, notably a Meowscarada deck, right? And so when you take a look across the metagame, like, you know, it's really interesting to see people's frustrations, but also on the other side of it, they're still really, really good players being really, really consistent in tournaments, right? And like maybe that kind of says, hey, so the game isn't completely luck based. Is it? Does it have a lot of luck? Obviously, but like the game is not completely luck based. The biggest and most important skill is deciding what 20 cards to bring to a tournament or to ranked. That's, in my opinion, the biggest skill interpretation in the game, right? After that, then you're gonna have these mini micro decisions that could definitely lead to a win or a loss or a potential tie. And so based on all those things, you also start to see other cards in past formats that were pretty dominant start to kind of fall to the side because either their payoff isn't that big or they're just a little bit too slow to deal with some of the one prize decks or the fast aggressive decks. And so cards like Dialga EX really don't see a ton of play, even though sure they are, you know, you'll see the occasional like Skarmory, Dialga deck and so on. But cards like Dialga that for a minute had a really big glow up with a card like an Arceus EX have seemed to kind of fall out of favor. When you take a look at cards like Arceus EX, again, it's just a little slow. It doesn't have its own ramp, and you're also going to still need to have a full bench of other Pokemon that have good synergy with Arceus. Now, that does open the door for cards like Rotom, right, that has the link ability, and Carnivine that has a link ability. But by and large, you know, these cards have kind of taken a big step back in terms of their role in the metagame. When you take a look at some other popular cards that we're seeing, stuff like Beedrill, it's not necessarily becoming a main focus of any deck, right? That 16 trainer Beedrill deck that we talked about weeks ago really never found its place because Meowscarada was able to do almost a better job at what Beedrill was trying to do. And eventually we did see the Meowscarada 2 of line, right? Where you play 2 of each, right? And then you play 1 Beedrill line, right? 1 of each. And so you're starting to see like a lot of these cards kind of be added to try to give a little bit of a top end to some of these decks. But by and large, like you're not seeing a lot of successful stage 2 decks that are EXs in particular, right? That's just not very common. Now, sure, you will see the occasional Gyarados deck. And the problem with Gyarados is that, you know, if you don't open Manaphy or a way to get Manaphy into the active, then sometimes that game plan is immediately thwarted, right? It's just immediately put on its back foot. But the thing about Gyarados that stands out to me is that its amazing stat line continues to keep it relevant. 100 in HP and 140 damage, although 140 damage is a little bit iffy sometimes because you need stuff like Red or Rocky Helmet. It still has a solid place in the metagame, although it's not necessarily what I would consider dominant, right? Like when I think of dominant, I honestly think of Giratina and Mewtwo or Giratina and Darkrai. Now, granted, sure, one of those decks may fall out of favor, but at the end of the day, if you made me choose what's the most dominant deck in the game right now, it would be some form of a Giratina variant. Now, there's definitely hard counters, but some of those hard counters just straight up lose to other matchups that are in the field. Whereas if you play a dominant basic EX deck, you have a pretty good matchup spread against the field, and then sure, you can get hard countered, but those hard counters are dependent on a lot of stage 2s, particularly one prize stage 2s, right? So they're not EXs. Then you've got your other players in the game that we've seen in the past that kind of have also fallen out of favor, like Executor EX. And just to be honest, the metagame where Executor EX, it was like a Raid Boss EX, and basically you had like a 60% chance and higher to curve Executor EX. Like in my opinion, I didn't enjoy that meta, right? It wasn't very fun to me. It felt like the deck was so good. It was almost like a little oppressive, right? Like when you looked at top cuts and you started breaking down like just how dominant Executor EX was, it was almost too dominant. But it, in one way or another, it's almost like we shifted from those broken stage ones of Gyarados from Mythical Island to Executor when, you know, the Dark Zone meta kind of started to take shape and eventually moved into Executor EX. You started to see a shift in the game where, okay, hey, you can still evolve Pokemon and have pretty good success, to now, as we've seen Shining Revelry, big basic EX Pokemon, as well as the Arceus Dialga meta, we're starting to see like a trend where it's phasing out a lot of our favorite evolution Pokemon, even though some of them have like really big attacks like a Charizard, right? Like Charizard from Genetic Apex is still a decent card, right? And if you get lucky in a tournament run, you can definitely win a whole tournament. But by and large, it's just very difficult to play stage 2s unless they're obscenely broken or have great stats, right? Like the only reason why you could make an argument for Charizard is because it can just straight up sweep, right? It can sweep after you get it out if you have enough energy, no matter pretty much what you're playing against. And that's a big deal. When you take a look at some of the other stage 2s, again, I backtrack and take a look at stuff like Gallade, right? Stuff like Rampardos. Those Pokemon can be good enough to sweep, but generally speaking, the reason why they're not played as often as they were, you know, before when the format had just started is because people have started to tech against them, right? They're running cards like Mars. You've even seen some Japanese players bringing red card, and as well as not only that, some of those decks can struggle to those really fast aggressive decks that are bringing stuff like Carnivine and stuff like Skarmory. So basically you've got this weird kind of meta where at the end of the day, if you're not playing big basic EX Pokemon, you better be playing a deck that pretty much counters them, because if you're not playing either of the two, it's really difficult to win in ranked mode or do very well in tournaments. Now sure, there's going to be rogue decks that are always going to pop up. I'm talking about the larger percentage of the results, right? I'm talking about the big players at the top that are consistently doing well. It's very tough to see rogue decks doing well. And that kind of leads you to the next question that you may have, right? So what do we do with all of this knowledge, and what cards can we think would have an impact in changing something like this? Let's start with the Pokemon tools and the counters that they could potentially have. Tool Scrapper would be a card that a lot of people would look at using as a one-of in their deck because it's an item card that allows you to discard 2 Pokemon tools attached to any of the Pokemon that are in play. So it could be your own Pokemon, it could be Pokemon on your opponent's side that have tools, but basically you are removing up to 2 Pokemon tool cards. Now this could help in a lot of matchups. It could maybe even slow down some of those big basic EXs, or it could be a nice interesting answer to cards like Skarmory. This card could definitely change up the way that we play the game. What if you didn't want to remove the tools though? There's also cards like Tool Jammer, where it states, as long as the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, Pokemon tools attached to your opponent's active Pokemon have no effect. So basically, Tool Jammer would turn off your opponent's Giant Cape or Rocky Helmet or whatever Pokemon tool they continue to introduce to the game. So that's definitely 2 different options that you could have that could deal with Pokemon tools in a very interesting way, and both, in my opinion, are pretty interactive and require your opponent to also be playing the game. And that's one thing that I really want to focus on. I don't think that the game is in a great spot whenever we're playing a lot of like Dredagon, Giratina, Darkrai, Go. Giratina, Dredagon, Darkrai, Go. Like, I think that that's like a boring, repetitive game state that a lot of people don't have a lot of fun in. Is it easy to counter? Sure, if you're building your deck to be like a fighting deck where you can snipe around Dredagon, or even some of those Rotom decks, right? But in general, I don't think that that's an enjoyable experience for a lot of people. Another thing to look at is evolution Pokemon. Some people are looking for ways to make evolution Pokemon have more consistency. And just to be honest, the way that they could address this is just making making the stage 1 and stage 2 EX Pokemon just have bigger stats. But the problem is a lot of people are going to dislike that, right? If we see a stage 2 with 300 HP or 280 HP or 250 HP, a lot of people are going to look at the game and say, oh, you're just printing bigger numbers. But the thing is, that would be able to actually make a stage 2 relevant and make a stage 2 worth playing, because the payoff, I don't just evolve something and then it gets one shot by, Giratina or Darkrai or some combination of it. Right? So that's something that's really interesting to think about, and Timer Ball could be a way that makes a little bit more consistency for evolving Pokemon, because if you flip 2 coins, basically for each heads, you're going to get to search your deck for an evolution Pokemon. Now, granted, in Pokemon Pocket it would probably work way different, but it's just a concept for a card that you could definitely see maybe making its way to Pokemon Pocket. Another way to play evolution Pokemon and make them a little bit better, instead of maybe evolving from your hand, maybe you play a supporter card like a Wally's Training, where it says search your deck for a card that evolves from your active Pokemon and put it on your active Pokemon. This counts as evolving that Pokemon. So this would be a supporter that would allow you to maybe evolve into your stage 1 that maybe you don't have in your hand, but you have the stage 2 in your hand. This would definitely make evolution decks a lot more consistent. But again, you do have to ask yourself, is this crossing a threshold for being too powerful? Would this be way too good when you have cards like Gengar EX, the new Charizard EX, Beedrill, and so many other cards that you could probably think of that maybe aren't even EXs, right? Would it be too good, right? But it's another option that could definitely change the way that the game is played, and it could contend with those big basic EX Pokemon. Another variant of evolving Pokemon could be Evo Soda. Search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon and put it onto that Pokemon. You can't use this card during your first turn or on a Pokemon that was put into play this turn. So Evo Soda is basically another way to evolve Pokemon. However, it's not skipping the stage. So this could be another balanced way to play evolution decks, right? In stage 1 decks and stage 2 decks. However, you think about the power and consistency that this gives to cards like Gyarados, and it does seem a little bit intimidating, right? Are we really sure that we want to see a trainer card that gets Executor EX out on the third turn of the game, right? Are we sure we want to see that with that much consistency when you include cards like Pokemon Communications? I'm not sure, right? I don't know that that's good for the game, but I definitely know that that would probably be able to compete with a lot of these big basic EX Pokemon. Think Gyarados, Executor, those are just a few that come to mind. What about cards like Starmie EX? Maybe those start to see some play too, because again, Wally and Evo Soda would make a lot of stage 1s even more playable. Hey, shout out to my guy Probopass or Barrel EX, right? Hey, who knows? The ultimate dream for stage 2 enjoyers would be Rare Candy. Rare Candy is probably a card that you've heard many people talk about. I've made 17 videos about it, and if you were collecting a quarter for each time I talked about Rare Candy on my channel, you would probably be, well, only like $5 or $6 richer. But when you take a look at Rare Candy, it basically chooses one of your basic Pokemon in play, and you skip an evolution, and you put the stage 2 card on it. Now, again, this would be really, really busted for a handful of EX Pokemon. However, some of those EX Pokemon just can't see the light of day because the big basic EXs are just too good. The other thing that you have to think about when you print cards like Rare Candy is that for the next forever, right, unless you do rotations, Rare Candy is always going to be a card that people look at when a new stage 2 comes out. It's like, can this be good with Rare Candy because it's a stage 2? And so that's going to create a future proofing problem as well. So could any of these 3 cards come in and immediately impact the game and maybe topple the big bad EX basic Pokemon meta that we kind of have seen for the past 2 metas? Yes, but would the kind of like recoil of doing this make the game less enjoyable? I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. The last set of cards that I'll talk about are pretty unique because they are all blocking abilities in some form or fashion. If you've played Pokemon TCG expanded format between the years of 2015 and maybe 2018, you probably encountered Garbodor. This Garbodor was very toxic, and that is a pun that is 100% intended. Garbotoxin is its ability, and it says if this Pokemon has a Pokemon tool card attached to it, each Pokemon in play, in each other's hand, and in each player's discard pile has no abilities. This would be a very interesting way to tackle Pokemon that have abilities and lock them down. However, this would definitely signal a really big change in the way that we play the game. Cards like Druddigon would probably not be able to be played in a meta where we see a lot of ability blockers because it would just be 100 HP basic that you have to run Leaf and not get much of a payoff from. The other thing that I look at is this would block a lot of abilities that maybe make the game a little bit more fun, right? And oh man, you're blocking my abilities, so now like my deck just doesn't work. Like that's definitely something that's happened before when we've seen cards like this in the TCG. But again, this would shut down cards like Giratina. This would shut down cards like Darkrai unless you are able to discard the tool that is on Garbodor. So again, I'm not sure that these are the correct answers, but these are all options that, hey, these cards could definitely change the meta and get us away from these big basic EX Pokemon. Alternative ways that you could deal with it could be recent cards like canceling Cologne. Until the end of your turn, your opponent's active Pokemon has no abilities. This includes Pokemon that come into play during that turn. So if your opponent switches in a new Pokemon, it still has the effect of canceling Cologne. This would not stop benched Pokemon like Giratina or Darkrai from doing their ability and then coming into the active. Obviously Giratina would end your turn, but Darkrai could come into the active after it pings you for 20. So maybe this card wouldn't be as impactful and would be a little bit more balanced, but it would definitely slow down cards like Druddigon that maybe could potentially deal 20 important points of damage. But again, it is an item card, so you could play it and still potentially use it as a supporter card if they were to bring it into Pokemon Pocket as is. The last couple of cards that I'll talk about are some interesting cards as well. This is the original Fossil Muck, and this card is a super OG, almost older than some of the viewers on this channel. Toxic Gas is a Pokemon ability that says ignore all Pokemon powers other than toxic gases. So basically, with this card on your bench, no other Pokemon powers or abilities are active. They all get disabled. Now that would be an extreme thing to do and bring to Pokemon Pocket, but for what it's worth, we did see a variant of Aerodactyl, which was from Fossil, get put into Pokemon Pocket with Aerodactyl EX. The only thing is, instead of Aerodactyl EX stopping all evolutions, Aerodactyl EX only stops the active opponent's Pokemon. So that is worth noting. Maybe they print Muck and say, hey, Muck only stops Pokemon abilities in the active spot. That's definitely a real thing. That could definitely happen. But again, who knows? The last option that I'll give you is another throwback. Again, as old as some of my viewers, but this is Goop Gas Attack from the Team Rocket set many years ago. I remember I've talked about this card before on my channel, but I'll tell the story again. When I first saw this card, I thought it was fake. I thought my neighbor that was coming over trying to trade me cards was trying to trade me fake cards. I was like, yo, bro, this ain't real. I never seen this card before, but it was because it was brand new. But basically, all Pokemon powers stop working until the end of your opponent's next turn. So that's all powers, right? Your opponent's and yours. But again, all of these cards could definitely impact the way that we play the game and definitely make the meta change and potentially not be as dominated around these big basic EX Pokemon, and it would potentially allow for other strategies to be invented and maybe come to light, and maybe some of your favorite cards. So what do you think? How do you think the game could be fixed? Do you think the game needs fixing at all? And what are some cards that you're looking forward to seeing in the next set? I appreciate you guys for taking time out of your day for watching my content. I am so sorry that I've had a little bit of a delay with putting out videos and content. Honestly, I've had some real life stuff going on. The biggest thing that I've got going on is it's about to be summer, and honestly, my air conditioning unit it needs a lot of work, right? And so I'm trying to make sure that that gets done. It's very expensive, so I'm like going through that whole process. And I've owned this house since 2019, and it's been a fantastic process and fantastic journey so far. But a word to the wise, not financial advice, but just because you have a warranty on your home doesn't mean that that warranty is going to cover some of your appliances. I had to learn that the hard way. Yeah, that's a whole nother subject, but basically that's a big reason why I haven't been putting out as much content. But with the new set coming out, I definitely will be bringing you guys more bangers, more videos, and more live streams. So I hope to see you then. And until next time, I'll catch you later. Peace.